Hello and welcome to Business Africa. I am Ruth Lago. The headlines this week: the 6th AU-EU Summit will take place on February 17 and 18 in Brussels. The meeting is aimed at laying new foundations of the partnership between the African Union and the European Union. Will it enable Europe to catch up on China and Turkey, two big investors on the continent? During the latest AU Assembly, leaders inaugurated the African Union Year of Nutrition. What are the economic policies passed in Addis Ababa in order to strengthen the continent's nutritional resilience and food security? And last, Tanzania and Burundi have signed a $900 million deal to build a railway. The project is supposed to boost trade in Eastern Africa. Thank you for joining us. The European Union devoted 74 million euros between 2014 and 2020 to support the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. If proven successful, the area could help Europe regain a prominent economic status in Africa. As the AU-EU Summit approaches, the old continent is no longer Africa's main economic partner. Emerging powers are new players. They take advantage of procedural complexities, slowing down financing, and make a revamp of the collaboration between the two continents more necessary.
Europe says it wants to build a new relationship with Africa, and the EU-Africa Summit of February 17th and 18th will give the first hints about how differently Brussels wants to engage with Africa. The EU remains the continent's leading multilateral partner, with trade that grew by 20% between 2016 and 2020 to reach $227 billion. But bilaterally, China retains the top spot, with two-way trade with Africa topping $254 billion in 2021. With Beijing building infrastructure under its Belt and Road Initiative, the EU has sought to counter it with its own, dubbed Global Gateway, promising to mobilize over 300 billion euros by 2027. For Africa, which is desperate to industrialize and create jobs, access to cheap credit is key. Many countries find European lenders hesitant and complex. As a result, Africa remains the reservoir of raw materials, with exports up 42% between October 2020 and October 2021, according to the OECD. At this summit, the EU promises to strengthen economic integration while helping Africa adapt to climate change and the transition to a digital economy.
Joining us today to talk about it, economist Christopher Dembig. Thank you for your time.
Bonjour.
Could you tell us why the European Union is challenged by emerging powers on the continent, especially at the economic level?
The European Union has always been interested in Africa, but the reality is that the EU has never had a very active policy. Of course, there have been many promises that have been kept, but fundamentally, the European Union has been disengaged for many years. As we have seen, the partnership, particularly between the European Union and the Mediterranean, has not really worked, especially after the revolutions in the Arab countries. So we see that there's been a de facto disengagement, and also, I think, on the side of African countries. We have realized that Europe has not always kept its promises. And of course, there is a gap, and it is always filled by someone else. Of course, there's a little bit of the United States, but fundamentally, it's all about China today as the actor that is more and more present in Africa.
As of today, what has Europe offered so far to regain a privileged partner position?
So there are great ambitions in particular. Europe is interested in creating a large free trade zone. This is not a new subject. It is a subject that's been on the table for many years. And to be realistic, it will be very difficult to make progress on the part of the African countries, because a consultation also requires technical progress. A free trade area cannot be established overnight, but there's also reluctance on the part of some EU countries. So unfortunately, at least my fear is that this new summit will not lead to much. And I think that the expectations of African countries are, in the end, relatively low. And we can see this quite clearly. Basically, if we propose a free trade area, which is the main theme, we can see that it is very difficult to make progress. So more promises. Of course, there are all the questions of development, development aid, and eventually the fight against the pandemic, but not much progress that is very concrete.
You talked about promises just now. On the one part, the EU pledged to share vaccines to Africa through the COVAX initiative, but on the other part, there is this refusal to drop COVID vaccine patent rules when African countries have requested them. Has it affected AU-EU relations?
But completely. Today, what we need to understand is that if the European Union would really like to be a central player in Africa, there's of course this question of the pandemic that is central. So of course this implies the supply of vaccines, but behind that it also implies investing in health and transport infrastructure, because some African countries do not have them, or at least not sufficiently distributed throughout the territory. So this is a very long-term investment, and if the EU decides to move in that direction, it would undoubtedly be very positive. But the reality is that there is a lot of reluctance among European countries. As you rightly mentioned, the issue of licenses is also a question of development aid, particularly in terms of health and road infrastructure, which are essential if we want to fight the pandemic effectively. And unfortunately, it is true that there is little hope.
African nations want to welcome companies from industrialized countries that invest in the industrialization of the continent. Could this not be an opportunity to start over AU-EU relations?
What we have to see is that Europe is starting to take a different interest in Africa. Finally, Europe has tried to make big partnerships. But I see a positive impact today. We see European investors, especially private ones. They are interested in Africa because finally you have very beautiful opportunities there. Then there is, of course, everything that is industrial. We know very well raw materials. This is not new, but you also have in many countries very beautiful creations in the field of e-commerce, in the field of startups, a lot of innovation. You see young people in African countries. That's very positive. But there's also a problem of financing. The African states can only do so much, the local private actors too. But the reality is that we're also starting to see investments from Europe in these areas. And that is a good way to move beyond just the industry and raw materials.
Thanks again for your time and insight, Mr. Dambik. Strengthening nutritional resilience and food security on the continent is the 2022 objective of the African Union. For Africa to break free from food dependency, African leaders suggested to invest in food processing systems to better exploit arable lands and re-examine partnerships to put the focus on concrete mega projects.
Chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mahama, says a continental strategy is needed to focus on identifying innovative sources of financing, debt cancellation, and reducing the adverse effects of the pandemic on economies. Mahama was speaking at the AU Commission's extraordinary session in Addis Ababa. He recalled that the COVID-19 pandemic led to a contraction in growth of 2.1% in 2020 and an increase in the debt ratio of 10 points of GDP for the African economy. Some of the submissions at the extraordinary session of the AU leaders in Addis Ababa included a decision to name 2022 the Year of Nutrition. To achieve this, they plan to strengthen agri-food, health, and social protection systems by accelerating human capital development. As for economic change, which is one of the 5 priority areas, the AU says it is waiting for the promises of foreign countries to be fulfilled because the impact of climate change cost African economies between 3 and 5% of their GDP. Although it was unanimously agreed that Africa was not responsible for climate change. However, the continent continues to bear both the shocks and the cost of the effects.
Tanzania and Burundi reinforced their bilateral relations. The Eastern African nations hope to build a railway that will connect the Dar es Salaam port to other countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo. Both authorities vow the investment won't go beyond $900 million.
Tanzania, East Africa's second-largest economy, has set itself a target of transporting 1 million tons of goods to Burundi and 3 million tons of minerals from Burundi to Tanzania each year. To achieve this, Dodoma is banking on a 282-kilometer-long railway line that will link Uvinza in the west of the Gitenga in central Burundi. The overall cost of the project is estimated at $900 million. To finance it, a call for investors was recently opened, and sectors that could offer opportunities to financiers are being studied by Tanzania and Burundi. Tanzania, which wants to become a regional trade and transport hub, is building a standard gauge railway line that will eventually link the port of Dar es Salaam to its landlocked neighbors, including the Democratic Republic of Congo. In 2020, the pandemic impacted Tanzania's GDP from 5.8% in 2019 to 2% in 2020. Sectors impacted include exports, tourism, manufacturing, and services. However, the economy rebounded by 5.1% in 2021 and is expected to grow by another 5.1% in 2022, according to IMF.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Business Africa. I am Ruth Lago. I'll see you soon.